water loop.
Welcome to Waterloop, the podcast that explores solutions for sustainability and equity in water. I'm the host, Travis Loop. This episode is part of a series, Mississippi by Nature, that looks at the use of nature-based solutions to help the river and its communities. The series is supported by the Walton Family Foundation and outfitted by Patagonia. The Mississippi River is essential to global agriculture and trade, but it is increasingly vulnerable to climate impacts, including severe droughts and floods that pose economic and environmental challenges to communities along the river. Colin Wellenkamp, Executive Director of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, discusses how the Coalition of Mayors is advancing nature-based solutions to build resilience. So as I'm putting together this series on the Mississippi River and nature-based solutions, I absolutely had to talk to you for one of these conversations. Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. Please give kind of the overview of this organization and the work.
Sure. We're an association of 105 U.S. cities along the 10-state full-length Mississippi River corridor. We are all mayors, so you have to be a mayor of a city, main stem, adjacent of the Mississippi to be in our association. So we're led by the mayors of La Crosse, Wisconsin and Vicksburg, Mississippi. And they're assisted by a panel of 10 mayors, one from each of the states that touches the Mississippi. So it's a nice little geographic trivia for you, which 10 are those states. And they are very committed to making this corridor and the basin at large, the more mega 31 state Mississippi River Basin, a place of prosperity and a place where climate change has less impacts, less detriment to our resources and our population and our infrastructure. And we've been around for almost 13 years, and it's been quite a journey, lifting this tremendous resource that's right over there that's sort of gone through a benign neglect over the last few generations, as the Mississippi River has been treated more as a liability than an asset, unless you're moving grain or you're moving an aggregate of some sort. Then it's considered, or has been considered, valuable. But now, the whole river valley is going through a renaissance as cities now turn and make an about face toward the Mississippi and embrace it for all it has historically brought to their communities from the very beginning and their founding, to augmenting and improving those opportunities going into the future. Because at the end of the day, Mississippi does offer 50 cities, 20 million people, their primary source of drinking water.
Wow.
Including me and my family.
Yeah. I love a lot of the things you just said. I'll pick on them. As I've been traveling along the river, I've definitely noticed this about face, like actually physically happening. Not just putting the river more in the minds of those places, but physically, like, let's get those roads or those big concrete structures out of the way and connect people to the water again, which leads to so many education opportunities and engagement.
Yep.
What are the water challenges that these mayors are facing in their communities that they're having to come up with solutions for?
They're significant. So the total bill for the 10-state corridor of water infrastructure restoration and replacement is $40 billion.
Billion with a B.
Billion with a B. Now that's the whole state of each of the 10 states, okay? Not just along the Mississippi. But just along the Mississippi, the backlog is still in the tens of billions. So, and what is that? Well, it's a combination of delivery systems, pipes, pumps, water filtration plants and systems, and then we've sustained quite a bit of destruction over the past 20 years. So basically from Hurricane Katrina forward, we've sustained about $246 billion in actual losses directly along the Mississippi River. And that's from flooding, drought. Drought is a lot more expensive than flooding, typically lasts longer, implicates more economies, and intense heat. And then, of course, the most expensive minus there is named storms. Nothing beats named storms. But right under hurricanes is drought effects.
That's amazing. People don't think about that when you talk about the Mississippi and kind of the Midwest, right, as drought. They think of the California and the Colorado River Basin. So really key to flag that. I mean, it's been in the news the past few years, though, with saltwater intrusion threatening New Orleans drinking water and with navigation challenges, right, from the river being so low. Interesting. So you just talked about like the hard infrastructure needs.
Yes.
The water distribution, treatment, levees, all that kind of thing. Could you talk about the rise of nature-based solutions, that green infrastructure piece, as a way to tackle some of these challenges and maybe offset the big bill a little bit?
Right. Absolutely. So looking at municipal water systems, both in urban and rural areas, it became clear to mayors about 15 years ago we couldn't afford to conventionally replace and restore all these systems using old methods. We're not going to pump and pipe our way out of these problems. We're going to have to supplement that with natural systems, environmental services, which can operate for us much more cheaply over a much larger area with drastically reduced maintenance and operation costs. The trick is, there wasn't a lot of data and knowledge on how to connect those two worlds. The conventional hard infrastructure world of engineering, planning, zoning, municipal operations, with the conservation, biology, aquatic ecology, and habitat world. Putting those two together in the same room and with the same mission, delivering clean drinking water to humans, was a new prospect. That has taken a monumental amount of work, a lot of investment in people and time, and quite frankly, Travis, the development of new careers. So you have these new jobs that are onboarding not just a city administration, but also ecological restoration, resilience, climate mitigation, climatology, geology, hydrology, not in just the natural world, but in the very urban world. Because they are interconnected, but they've not interacted very closely in terms of beyond, well, that's the city, this is nature over here. Now we have to integrate the two quite closely if we're going to move forward.
So that's like just a conversation and relationship-based approach where a city has a problem and they're like, let's get the engineers together with these environmental folks in the room and actually talk about how we can approach this? Is that how that then happens or turns into action?
That's how it starts.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how it starts. And then things quickly get very technical. And it becomes obvious that we need data scientists. We need computer engineers. We need ways of accumulating all this data, putting it together, interpreting it. We need technologists to develop new types of conservation habitat technology, because when you're talking about taking a natural asset like a wetland, right, and you're going to use that wetland not just for habitat and fish and ducks, but you're going to use it to protect a city from a climate disaster, or you're going to use it to clean water for people to drink, that's a much different conversation. Now we have changed and added to the mission of that natural asset, and you can't just do it. You can't just push the asset into a demand like that, it'll destroy it.
You have big things at stake there, right? The drinking water, flooding protection, so you better have the data, the science, the research to back up that natural solution is going to do what it's supposed to.
That's right, and if we are restoring a wetland next to a dense urban area, what does the runoff situation of the streets and sidewalks look like going into that wetland? Is the wetland going to survive? Are we going to be able to keep it? It is a living thing. So can we keep these systems alive and functioning and delivering the services that we want to add to them for municipal good? And a lot of that has come to getting all of these professionals together in the room. And that's what mayors do. That's the role of a mayor, is to we're not experts in anything except people.
Yeah.
You know, we're the experts in setting the table,
Sure.
opening the room, and having the right folks sit down together and plot out a plan and scale it.
Yeah.
That's another challenge, is these climate impacts are so severe and persistent. There's not a lot a city can do inside itself. A little bit, but it won't move the needle much. You have to open your scope of work to the larger surrounding landscape, and really to have much of an impact to save lives and secure the future of the city. So we have mayors supporting and working on projects that may be 30 miles away from their city, because that's where the flood storage is going to be.
Sure.
Once it gets to your front door, it's a little late. You've already missed all of that opportunity to collect that water and put it somewhere else other than your downtown. Yeah. So you have to go afield a bit, and you have to broaden your scope. And that has created challenges from a traditional municipal management point of view. How do you do that? And why would I do that? 30 miles away, there ain't nobody voting for me up there. I'm not collecting taxes from that area. No, but that area is the key to protecting your city into the future. And that's where a lot of this has landed.
The climate change term has become very politicized and polarizing, you know, and some would say this is a part of the country where that's especially the case. How does that land then, to have those conversations or use that terminology?
Yeah, mayors have to talk about this at home, the ways that work for them. You know, when we all get together in a meeting, whether it be DC or a city along the Mississippi, we can talk about climate change all day long and call it that. Now, when a mayor goes home, the conversation and the labels may have to shift a little bit. And that has worked for us too. Even in the halls of Congress, we haven't met one member, whether they be far left, far right, or in the middle, that doesn't want to talk about disaster mitigation, that doesn't want to talk about resilience. Everybody wants to talk about lowering the deficit and the bill for any kind of event, whether it be drought, heat, or flood, or storm. Everybody wants to do that. So we have made a lot of ground and a lot of allies and gotten a lot of bipartisan support by keeping it focused on the solutions. We don't get into the more cultural aspects of who's to blame for climate change, the doom and gloom of, oh, by this date, we're all hosed. Yeah. We don't get into those things. We get into, look, I just had a 1,000-year rain event. This is what it did to my city. I'd really like it not to happen again for another 1,000 years. We have had 2 1,000 rain events along the Mississippi in 6 years.
Have to change those calculations, right?
Yeah.
You know, you talked about the nature side of things, the ecological services side, the need to work with different partners. Could you talk a bit about who some of those big organizations are that you're collaborating with through your Mississippi River Cities and Towns initiative? I've been talking with Ducks Unlimited and Nature Conservancy as a couple as I've worked my way up, but love to hear from your side.
So those are delivery partners, which are great. Especially DU is fantastic in that they can do full service conservation and habitat in-house. They can build you and deliver a natural asset start to finish within their operation, which is great for us. They're one of the few conservation authorities on Earth that can do that at the scales we're looking for. Another big partner in this really is who stands to lose the most from a non-working or a devastated or compromised Mississippi River system. Who's losing the most jobs? Who's losing the most revenue? Who's losing the most economic potential? And that really comes down to the lack of a better category, the global commodity supply chain. So if you think of, you know, folks are listening at work, folks are viewing this at home, look in your pantry, go to your faucet. Chances are you're drinking river water or surface water from somewhere. Chances are there are commodities in your pantry that you are cooking with today and tomorrow that come out of the Mississippi River Basin. So that's Cargill, ADM, ConAgra, General Mills, Kellogg, Land O'Lakes, starting to implicate a lot of commodity companies, Pepsi, Coke, Anheuser-Busch. Now we talk about where are you getting the coffee, where's the water for your coffee coming from in the morning? Where's the water for the beer and the wine coming from in the evening? If you're getting your products from Anheuser-Busch, it's most likely Mississippi River water. If you go to Starbucks and you live in a city along the Mississippi River, chances are that Starbucks is using municipal water supply, which is coming out of the Mississippi. So it touches our lives quite a bit. Every time you go to the grocery store, the price of that item, eggs, poultry, or any kind of grain, like wheat, soy, whatever, is going to be dictated by the conditions of the Mississippi River Basin. If there's a drought or a major disaster somewhere in the basin, you're probably going to feel it in the grocery store. How much you feel it depends on the disaster. So we just came out of a 16-month drought. That did have a price implication at neighborhood stores. Not as big as the one of 2012. That had a global price implication. That was a 50-year drought. But this one lasted longer. The 50-year drought in 2012 lasted about 6 months. This one lasted 16. So it was longer, more expensive in that regard in terms of time. So it is critical that we have all of these companies who are employing our folk, who are collecting, distributing, and manufacturing our food, and who are selling it on the retail side. Walmart, Target, the big grocery chains, Albertsons, Schnucks, Dierbergs, Food Lion, a Safeway, all these folks, US Foods, they've all got to have a place at the table because they're the ones that stand the most to lose from a compromised basin. Not to mention all the transportation companies out there that are moving all this stuff for us.
So they're all part of this greater table and looking at how can we build resilience in this Mississippi River corridor? How can we support the mayors and these communities and these projects?
Right. Some are more convinced than others.
Sure.
And some are easier to work with than others,
Yeah.
I would say.
Sure.
But
fair.
yeah, they're all invited to be a part of this discussion because quite frankly, they have to be. They have to be. And even there's a third category which is called the food management industry. These are all the folks that handle large food contracts like Bon Appetit, company and Marriott Sodexo. Those companies are a critical component too because they are negotiating and managing 10-year contracts for food supply for large areas. Where are they getting their food? Are agricultural regenerative practices on field being deployed from the folks that they buy from? Do they surround those fields with catchment basins to clean the water? Do they reduce runoff and erosion and sedimentation? Are they catching nutrient loading? All of these things are important to the conversation in order to keep this basin, the Mississippi River Basin, is the most important on the planet because 1 in 12 people on Earth consume commodities produced in our basin. It's 40% of the world's food supply.
This all underscores why I'm so excited to be on this journey. It's awesome to explore the Mississippi and it's so significant. So when it comes to really the nature-based solutions, again, returning to that, that this has kind of been a newer point of emphasis. Could you talk about the benefits of these type approaches, using them in complement to the traditional infrastructure, why it's so valuable?
Yeah, absolutely. So, traditionally we would use lots of pipes and pumps to move water around, manage water, manage the landscape, move water off the landscape, move it onto the landscape. And more, that is becoming unaffordable, and the soil health of our basin is in a 30-year decline. We supplement that with inputs to continue to get the bushel supply that we're looking for year over year. But ultimately, the logical end here is a collapse. And the way to avoid that and provide the infrastructure we need to continue to produce and move materials is through letting nature work for us and augmenting nature's processes and environmental services instead of fighting against them. So what does that mean on the ground in real terms? Well, it means cover crop deployment. It means helping farmers pay for all these things. Like I said before, surrounding fields with catchments so that we capture that water and we capture that soil before it goes into the Mississippi or Missouri or Cedar or Arkansas or Ohio, any of the major tributaries. And on the city side of things, it means building, not relying on levees and flood walls anymore, but relying more on forests, wetlands, marshes, and critically, reconnected backwater and reconnected floodplain. We have tens of thousands of acres of floodplain and backwater that used to be connected to the Mississippi, which actually served us because it was a natural drainage point. Water would collect on the floodplain, then it would drain out to the Mississippi. Well, if you wall off the floodplain from the Mississippi, water's just going to collect and flood your city and stay there forever. You've got to reconnect it to the main stem or nearby major tributary, depending on where you are. These things also provide additional co-benefits. So they reduce the heat sink attribute of our cities. So, I talked about intense heat. Intense heat is actually one of our #1 killers along the Mississippi River. It's a silent killer, especially for children, disabled, and elderly. Folks just pass in their homes and we don't even know until afterwards. So a degree differential in a city center can be upwards of 10 degrees hotter than the surrounding natural areas. So if we can put natural areas throughout our cities, increase green space, and bring natural assets closer into the city experience, we reduce those effects. Also, shaded infrastructure lasts 20% longer than unshaded infrastructure. So trees are a magnificent asset in not only prolonging the life of our infrastructure, but they reduce crime and they improve public health and they attract business. Property values go up in urban forested areas too, instead of go on decline, which is what happens when you don't have trees. So these are
We're standing here under some nice shade right now.
Yeah, right here. We're benefiting
it
from.
Feels wonderful, absolutely.
Yeah, so these are all benefits that we can onboard, whereas built infrastructure just gets you basically one benefit for whatever it's built for, and you're saddled with the costs of maintaining and operating that. Whereas forests, you don't necessarily have to do that.
I want to ask you about the collaboration again with Ducks Unlimited and what I've seen about this really ambitious kind of plan throughout the corridor to ramp up projects like this. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, so what we did, we sat down with DU, and this was kind of by accident, really. Not far from where we're standing right now, just north of here, Grafton, Illinois. Mayor at the time was Rick Eberlin. And he had heard about a Ducks Unlimited project just above his city to renature a confluence area with the Illinois River. So they had basically purchased a bunch of easements, and they were gonna reconnect this whole confluence area back to the Mississippi, where the Illinois comes into the Mississippi. And Mayor Eberlin asked me, so they're going to allow that area to flood now? Correct. It wasn't flooding before? No, it used to be farm, it was cut off, but it's not farmed anymore, they're just going to reconnect it. How much flooding is it going to take? Wow, they said something about 2,000 lateral feet of flooding. Could they put more in? I mean, it was just a conversation that led to, hey, what you doing? How much flooding are you onboarding? And can you do more?
To help my downstream community.
Yeah, I'm right next door.
Yeah.
So if it's going to flood that area, it ain't flooding me. And that led to a conversation of, what else you got going on? What other projects are you onboarding that flood, that are next to our cities? And it just picked up and went from there. And DU honestly said, we didn't think about habitat and conservation work as a disaster resilience attribute. We didn't think of it that way, but it totally is, especially the closer we get to your cities. And we found out that they had a whole portfolio of work that could potentially benefit our cities. It would need to be tweaked and structured a little bit to incorporate municipal priorities. And some of the siting would need to be changed a little bit, but all told, we came up with 100,000 acres spread over 9 states and 45 cities of projects. And that is truly, you're getting into scales now that could really move the needle for us and really onboard a lot of risk.
We're by the community of East St. Louis, really close to the Mississippi River. Could you talk about the kind of historic and even recent problems that this community has endured from the Mississippi and flooding?
Sure.
I mean, it's made national news repeatedly.
Yeah. East St. Louis is one of our more challenging communities along the Mississippi River. Out of 105 cities on the river, some communities, I would say, are in more of an acute situation, and that's basically because of history. Those things don't happen overnight. So East St. Louis has been a community that has been neglected and disenfranchised and left out of prosperity for a very long time. And we have a couple of those along the Mississippi, and now the community is trying to figure out how to make the most out of this river next to them to bring them back. And there have been starts and stops in that regard, but East St. Louis has been neglected for so long, not by the folks that live there, but by everybody else. The state of Illinois, the larger St. Louis region, it's always treated as a liability, and it's got the best views of downtown St. Louis. So if you're in the real estate business and you want a great view of a cityscape with one of the continent's largest rivers, East St. Louis is your best bet. It's just, is there everything else to serve that infrastructure?
Well, you just use the word infrastructure and neglect. So a lot of that is the lack of investment in infrastructure, including water infrastructure.
Right.
So part of their story is that failure of hard water infrastructure and also then the natural impacts of the river, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Systemically neglected on purpose through racial and cultural divides for decades. And turning that around is going to be a significant challenge. You don't just erase 100 years of that overnight or in a few years. So East St. Louis now, in our new climate reality, does have risk that it is weathering like everybody else, but it's in a less advantageous position to do anything about that risk than perhaps another community would that had more economic base, hadn't gone through the challenges that East St. Louis has over the last century. Like we talked about before, we have a lot of backwater flooding just as much as we have front door flooding off the river itself.
What does that mean, backwater flooding?
Backwater flooding is when you have a torrential rain event over a city, water wants to get to the Mississippi because it's the lowest point. Well, if it's falling behind the city and the river's on the other side, it's going to go through the city to get to it. In past times, there would be enough infrastructure to necessarily handle that. But now we're experiencing persistent torrential rain events of the 1,000-year mark, the 500-year mark, 200, 100-year mark that are just continually coming again and again and again and leaving a path of destruction behind them. Our cities, even our best cities, our most equipped, most economically developed cities, have a hard time with that. Much less one that has been enduring abject poverty for a really long time. So East St. Louis is one of those places.
So they're, I think what I've read is like their pumps and their septic systems or their sewer systems, all this stuff is just not equipped to handle this water.
No.
And that has contributed to that there's the backwater flooding moving in.
Right.
And then there's the failing water infrastructure. So they're like getting hit from above ground and below ground. That's
right. Yeah. So you'll also with East St. Louis is, and then this is not uncommon with southwestern Illinois, is you have these canal systems, these old canal systems that were dug decades ago to drain water. And this was because they were building communities and building farmland out, but they needed to drain the water to the Mississippi. So they built these canal systems to do that. Well, the canal systems have fallen into a state of disrepair. They've collapsed on themselves in many instances, or they're full of debris, both man-made, like cars, tires, large appliances, and then natural debris, huge trees and other such deciduous material. So it's these canals don't function the way they used to. They back up. They will back up. The river will rise above the stage of the canal and then back into the canal into the cities they're supposed to be draining. So you get it from both sides. And we have been trying to figure out a way, how do we help the city with its built infrastructure? Because you still need pipes and pumps, obviously. You still need roads and all of that, and you still need utilities. Okay, we need to help the city with that part. But we also need to give them a break on all these impacts. And just rebuilding what was already there isn't going to help them with that. You need additional capacity. That's where this asset comes into play.
We're out here at Horseshoe Lake, right by East St. Louis.
Right.
So tell me about this project, which is really awesome.
So this is an old meander scar of the Mississippi. So what you see right here in front of us is where the Mississippi used to go decades ago. And then it was carved out more and more, and then it straightened out, and now the Mississippi's over there. This remained a low-lying area that became a lake. That is Horseshoe Lake, and it's in the form of a hook because it followed the old path of the Mississippi.
Got a lot of those up and down this whole
We
corridor.
do.
Yeah,
we really
a lot of
do.
horseshoe lakes and horseshoe bends. And
That's right.
Yeah.
This is one of the bigger ones, especially for this part of the Midwest.
Okay.
And it also is very diverse. So we have wetland, marsh, lake, and we have forested area around it. So we've got a good amount of biodiversity right here and a good amount of habitat and aquatic life. All good stuff. We also have areas that we could expand those assets out more. It's basic parkland, it's state parkland. And there's areas where we could connect parts of the lake and the marsh and the wetlands together that weren't connected before through various connection structures.
And so that was a big part of the project, was connecting these different areas to increase the storage?
That's right.
Okay.
Increase the storage and allow the different habitats to service each other and build off each other, and just give this asset more capacity for all that water we talked about that would fall behind the city trying to get to the Mississippi.
Okay. And how much capacity does this project have now?
It's got over 750 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of capacity for flooding.
Incredible.
And
it was tested pretty early on.
It was
just like 2 years ago.
That's right. July of 22. That was a 1,000-year rain event that hit Missouri and Illinois. It left a path of destruction. I mean, when you have that much rain, everybody's going to get wet. But at least we know now this works. It functioned the way it was supposed to. It didn't get destroyed. Big plus. And it also recovered pretty quickly, behaved the way we thought it would, and onboarded a heck of a lot of water that would have otherwise proceeded south into East St. Louis.
And there's a feature at the end of it, if you will, like kind of an outfall that you can control,
right,
kind of letting this water back into the Mississippi.
That's right. So we have a slough on the lower end of the lake that DU has installed that allows us to hold water and let it out slowly over time. And in that rain event in July of 22, this thing filled up. I mean, it filled up to the top. And then we got hit by a drought, a 16-month drought, and we saw it all go down, and we saw the land open up, which actually, that's a good thing. It creates more capacity for more rain when that happens. So this is all nice natural cycle. It's all working. It's all doing what it's supposed to do. It isn't compromised. That was the really good news, is we were able to onboard a disaster, not destroy the asset, and have very little costs in cleanup.
And speaking of cost, I was shocked to learn how much this project costs and what the ROI that comes with that versus you go spend on hard infrastructure tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. How much did this cost?
This is just a few million.
Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah.
Well, that's great value.
But we mitigated tens of millions of dollars worth of damage in the life of the asset so far. And then you have the added benefit of this helps the region get cleaner water. This is a major outdoor recreation draw.
Could you build on that?
Sure. So the second largest economy on the Mississippi is outdoor recreation and tourism, and it's behind manufacturing. So if we can augment that industry, bring more people out here, capture those dollars, that just helps not just East St. Louis, but all the surrounding communities of Madison and Granite City and Sauget. So this asset's actually helping 4 cities. St. Louis, or East St. Louis, is one of the direct beneficiaries because it hugs the whole southwest bend of the lake, which is where a lot of the water would have gone if we hadn't captured it. But we've got all these other co-benefits that come along with it, not to mention all this forest helps reduce the heat sink effect and the intense heating of the cities around it.
Yeah. And what's the recreation, what are the recreation opportunities out here? How are people using this?
Of course, family, picnic, we're standing right next to a playground, but we have hunting and fishing. I would say most of the subscription for this area comes from hunting and fishing. I mean, just tens of thousands of people. It's one of the most visited areas, recreational areas for the state of Illinois.
Fantastic. And now you have a success story that you can share with other communities up and down the Mississippi and be like, look, this is how this can work for you, right?
Yep, absolutely. And we are doing that. And we actually had a showcase here in 2022 in September with a bunch of mayors from all up and down the Mississippi River came to see this. And DU was here, and we took them around to different areas of the asset, showed them the wetland over there, so they could see, this is what's possible perhaps around your community as well.
Yeah. I encourage people to check out the graphic or the map of that. I mean, it's exciting to me as a map person, as a water person, as doing this. It's like that is so ambitious in a good way, like exciting to see that bold approach be taken. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I definitely, I'm glad we finally connected here in your home turf of St. Louis. And you've been really helpful to me as I've traveled this river, and I look forward to heading upstream and connecting with more of your folks. Thank you, Colin.
Oh, thank you, Travis.
You're in the water loop.